We're going to do a tutorial on a puzzle. This is a three-piece puzzle I found at a market for sale one time for, I think it was $15. And so I figured my students could do that, and we have been. It's a three-piece puzzle and it fits together pretty snugly if you do your cuts correctly. So this project is specifically to learn the bandsaw and learn it well. You also be using files and chisels, maybe some sandpaper, and then the chop saw as well. So let's get started. The first piece we're going to work on has a notch cut out through the center of it that is exactly 3/4 of the project itself. So we have a 4 quarters, and we are going to take out 3 of those quarters. So all that's left is one interior section. This project is 6 inches long. It has sides that are 1.25 by 1.25, and this notch is centered in it. The notch is 1.25 as well, and it has cut out to the depth of half of it. So it's been cut out 1/2 inch and 1/4, which is 5/8 deep. So we have a section 5/8 deep on this side and 5/8 deep on that side by 1.25 wide. So we're going to start with this one. Your instructor should have given you a piece of material that's 1.25 by 1.25 and approximately 18 inches long if you're going to get all 3 of your pieces out of it. In my shop, I let the students try it as many times as they want because this is a learning experience. This is just over 18 inches, so I should be able to get my 3 6-inch pieces out of it. It should be square. If it's cut even at all at an angle, it's going to mess up your project a little bit. So when you grab your piece of wood, make sure it's square, 1.25 by 1.25. When you go to cut it 6 inches long, there may be a rule in your shop about how close you can get your fingers to the blade, next to the blade when you're cutting. In my shop, it's 4 inches. Your fingers have to be 4 inches away. So if I put this up and I'm cutting it 6 inches, that means my fingers have to be within the first 2 inches of that project to hold it down tightly. So my hand is going to rest over the top of the miter gauge, the stock gauge, and I'm going to pinch it there, and then I'll cut with the chop saw. You've probably already learned this from your instructor, but the slower you cut through, the less splinters you'll get on the back side of your project. Alright, let's start marking it up. So the first block we're going to cut out is 1.25 by 1.25 by 6 inches long, and we're going to cut a notch out of the center here, and the piece that we're going to put into this notch should fit smoothly right into it. So this width is 1.25 obviously, because that fits right into it. So with our new piece, it looks kind of complicated and it looks like there's a lot of measurements, but the truth is we only need to measure twice for this whole project. If you want to measure more times to make it more accurate, you can, but we only need to measure twice to get all the measurements we need. So the first measurement is to put how far in this mark is. Centered would be 3 inches, and we know that this project right here is 1.25 inches, so 1/2 1.25 is 5/8. So if the center is 3 inches, we need to come back 5/8 of an inch to put our mark here. So 3 minus 5/8 is 2 3/8. So we're going to put a mark in at 2 3/8. So if you have a tape measure, you can hook your tape measure on there and then put your mark at 2 3/8. However, you'll find really quick that if your tape measure isn't bent completely square, that your measurement can be off. And this is the most critical measurement because you're doing all your other measurements based on it. So a lot of times I'll tell my students to lock it out and pinch the end of their block on 10 inches. if they put the end of their block on 10 inches, exactly they can see the line, and then they can come in at 2 3/8 for their mark. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to have to turn this a little bit so that I can see it to put this mark. But I'm going to come in and put just a very tiny mark at 12 3/8, which would be 2 3/8 in. And the reason I did a very small mark is because if I do it very long, if I have a really long line, I won't be able to tell where exactly my mark is in at 2 3/8 because it might not be straight. So instead, I'm going to grab my speed square and I'm going to put my speed square across right where that mark is. Now, if I put the speed square right under the mark and then I drag my pencil along it, I won't be sure if my pencil lines up with that mark first or not. So if you want to be a really good carpenter, you can put your pencil first on the mark and then slide your speed square up to the pencil. I have a really sharp pencil, and so I can get accurately by putting the speed square right where it needs to be. So I'm going to drag my pencil along there right across my mark. If it doesn't land right on your mark, then your measurement will be off. And again, this is one of the most critical measurements. So I've come in 2 3/8. I don't know if you can see it, but my pencil line crosses over. Now another good piece of information is you notice I'm using a sharp pencil to do this. If you use a pen, the pen is going to bleed and then you won't be as accurate, and then you'll never be able to take that pencil line or that pen line off again. So try and use a sharp pencil when you do this project. Now that I have my mark, I could flip this around. If this is exactly 6 inches, come in 2 3/8 on this side. However, like I said before, I know that students don't like to measure, and we want to make this as accurate as possible. So instead, I'm going to grab one of my other blocks, and since I know this is what has to fit in there, I'll use this very block to rest it right there to put my mark on the other side. So again, I'll use my speed square and I will hook it right on my line. Once I've put it right across where my line is, I'm going to rest my other block of wood on top. With that block resting on top, I can run my pencil line across the top of that other block, because that's the board that's going to fit in this slot. So now, with only still having done one measurement, I have both those lines across there. Now if we refer back to the first block again, notice how we're only cutting out half of this. So now we need a line in the dead center of this. So we're going to turn this and we're going to put a line in the center. Again, we need to measure over half of this block. Half of 1 1/4 is 5/8, so I need to put a mark exactly at 5/8. The interesting thing about this is your eye is more accurate often than your measuring skills when it's this small. So if I use my tape measure and I put a mark exactly at 5/8 over, and then I trace my line up, I may look at it and say, man, it doesn't look right. And the truth is, it probably isn't right, because your eye can see something better than your measuring skills can follow from a pencil, from a tape measure, onto a block of wood. So what we're going to do is we're going to try it first using the tape measure and see what it looks like. So actually, I'm going to use the speed square because it's a lot easier to line up. And I'm going to put a mark exactly at 5/8 of an inch. Now, hopefully the board you're using is going to be a lighter color material. We usually use poplar when we make ours, but I wanted another example piece, so we're doing it out of dark wood, so it's harder to see my pencil line. So now that I have my pencil line centered, I have to do another pencil line on this, and then I can draw a line between those. So I'm going to use my speed square again, mark it 5/8 on this side. And now that I have a mark on each side, I can draw a pencil line between the two. Now this is where most students get off, is because you can't see exactly what you're doing when you try to mark those two. So if you can learn a new skill set with this project, it comes in very handy. I'm going to grab another board so you can see what I'm doing. But if I come in 5/8 of an inch and I put a mark, and I come in 5/8 of an inch and I put a mark, and then I rest my pencil or my finger on the edge of it and I line it up with that mark, I can just drag my finger down. And it's more accurate than actually using that ruler a lot of times, because my pencil is the exact same, or my finger is the exact same distance away. So I can put another mark right beside that and drag that down and put another. And one of the reasons this doesn't look exactly right is because there are imperfections in the side of the board. So as my finger runs down, it's following the edge of this. And you can kind of see how the line bends a little bit. Now in this project, this is completely square, but we're going to do the same thing. So you can use your speed square to trace a line between those, or you can practice using your finger on the side of the block and draw a line right between. And that's going to be as accurate as you need it to be. So now we have to transfer these exact same marks. If we're going to cut out this bottom side, we need to transfer those same marks to the next side. Again, we've only done two measurements. We measured in 2 3/8 and we measured up 5/8. And those are our only measurements we should need to do for this whole project. So the next thing we're going to do is rotate it and transfer those lines to the next side. Again, I'm going to transfer back to my speed square, and I'm going to line up the speed square with the edge, and then I can transfer that straight across to the other side. I don't have to remeasure. If you want to remeasure again, you can. And I'm going to do the same thing on this one. If you rotate it and your pencil lines don't line up exactly with a line previously, it means your measurements will be off as well. Now the interesting thing about what I was talking about doing things by eye is I can measure in 5/8, or I can look with my eye and decide where the center is. Now if I put a mark right over here, I can tell just with my eye that that's not centered. So if I move my mark over a little bit, I can still see that it's not centered. So if I move my mark over here and it looks centered, then it probably is centered. If it doesn't look centered, then it probably isn't centered. So just using my eye, I can line up and put a line across and find center without having to remeasure at 5/8. Now if you want to measure at 5/8 because you're not sure, that's fine. But this skill is very valuable when you're on the job site, to be able to eyeball something to center. And your eyeball can get that within 1/64 of an inch, which is as close you need for that project. So now we have one square we're going to cut out on that side and one square we're going to cut out on this side. And that will be our first project to cut on the bandsaw. So what we want to do here is we want to cut in on the inside of the line here, and we want to cut in on the inside of the line here, and then we're going to put our relief cut in, and we'll come back, do our other relief cut, and gradually get this square cut out, or rectangle. The problem is students oftentimes, the very first time, they try and get really close to that line, and if you try and get really close to that line and you eat that line, then once you get done, you're already past the line, and on the very first cut you have to throw your block away and start over. So the best idea is to start in a little ways and then work your way over to the line. If you start too close and you cut it, you're done in one shot and you have to go cut a new block. So it's always best to cut less than you need and work up to the line. Now if you look closely, you can see that there's still space between my pencil line and where I was cutting, both on the sides and on the bottom. So what this means is I still have a chance of getting my project 100%, and then I would rotate over and cut the X out of the next one as well. But the odds are that this project needs to be closer to that line. I was very accurate with my lines, and so I'll need to be very accurate with my cuts. So I'm going to come in here and cut a little bit more away on this block on both sides. Now before I do this, I'm going to test my other piece and see if it fits in there before I get too excited. So I'm going to bring up my other block and I'm going to see if it fits in there. And it doesn't, which it shouldn't because I did my pencil lines accurately. So I'm going to need to cut just a little bit more. When I do this, I can either cut in or I can turn my block just a little bit at an angle and then pull it back out, very gently rubbing along the side as I work my way up to that pencil line. Now this is a 3/8 inch wide blade, and if you have a 1/4 inch blade, it's going to turn a lot sharper, but it also has a tendency to dig in more. This one's not going to dig in as much as I pull out. Also, the sharper the blade, the easier it is to do this project. So I'm going to do a little bit more feathering and pull up to my line on both sides. So after doing the initial cuts on my block, I can see that it fits in on one side pretty well, but on the other side it's still a little tight. Now the common idea for students, if it's really close, I should shove it together. But the problem is if you do that, it will damage your other block. It's going to squeeze the fibers on your other block, and if it squeezes those, then it's going to be a different dimension than 1.25 inches. So the better option is to use a file or use the bandsaw and cut just a little bit closer. If your wood isn't completely dry, you can just leave it as is because your wood will shrink just a little bit because you cut more material away, and over time it'll shrink and it will loosen, and when it loosens it will allow you to slide it in easier. So I'm going to leave this one as is, and we're going to switch to my next block.